Hey everyone, welcome to the investor.bet AFL round 22 betting trend preview. In this video, every single week I go through, analyze each game of the round, go through who I think is going to win and why, and what I'm considering betting on in that matchup, and also go through what the odds were last time these sides played each other through their last 5 matches, who's been winning, who's been covering, what the odds were, and what the total points line was, have their games been going over or under the total, and how we can use that information to determine what bets we should make in the upcoming games as well. There's only 3 weeks left of the regular season now, so really closing in on the finals, but we still have pretty much 11 sides who can make the top eight. Collingwood still somewhat a chance, Hawthorn still a chance. Both these sides probably need to win their games this week. Obviously, Hawthorn play Carlton, Collingwood play the Sydney Swans on Friday night. So very, very interesting games coming up. And it's crazy how much the top eight has compressed. Right now, we only have 2 games between first and eighth place. And with 3 games still left, the ladder and these teams could change position pretty dramatically. And this is really good news for us as bettors because it means that a lot of these teams, there's a lot on the line in their games. Like sometimes you can get to this point of the season and there's quite a number of teams who don't really have much to play for. They're either locked in the top 4 or top 2. They're secured in 5th to 6th kind of range, or they're out of the race for finals. But at this stage, we still have a number of teams left who all have plenty to play for. So we're going to go through all the games coming up this weekend. But first, I just want to quickly go through what happened last weekend. What the betting outcomes of these games were. So of the 9 games, 5 went over, 4 went under. This season has been an over year so far, with the majority of games going over the total points line. Then also last weekend, it was pretty much a complete reverse of round 20. This time around, the home sides covered 7 of the 9 games. They also won 8 of the 9. The only away side that did win was the Brisbane Lions, beating St Kilda by 85 points in the last game of the round. And the only other away team who covered the spread was Adelaide against Geelong, only losing that game by 5 points. This weekend, also 5 of the 9 underdogs covered the spread. So underdogs, slight better record overall on the season for the underdogs. They've covered 94 games of 180 so far. So underdogs do have a winning record. Home sides have a slight winning record off the back of this 7-2 round that's just happened. And 4 underdogs won their games outright. The underdogs who won the West Coast Eagles beating Gold Coast. Then we had North Melbourne beat Richmond. Collingwood beat Carlton. And Essendon beating Fremantle by 1 point. Obviously, the major matches around, Port Adelaide beating the Sydney Swans by 112 points. It's going to be very interesting how the Swans come out of that game. I'm going to touch on that in a second. And a few close games between Collingwood and Carlton and GWS Hawthorn, and also Essendon Fremantle. Those games decided by 1, 2, and 3 points. And obviously, you could throw in the Cats Crows game decided by 5. So very interesting round overall, and it sets up well going into this round. The Swans, Collingwood kicks it off. Then also a top 4 clash with the Brisbane Lions and GWS. And yeah, a few other interesting games. So let's get into them. First game on Friday night, Sydney Swans back at home take on Collingwood. The Swans, $1.44. They're 15.5-point favorites. Probably, 6 weeks ago, Swans kind of look like, how's anybody going to beat this team going into the finals? They're clearly the team to beat. Since then, though, they've lost 5 of their past 6 games, and the only win was against North Melbourne. Of those 5 losses that they had, when you look a little bit closer, 3 of them were by 2 points or less. They lost by 2 to the Lions and Saints and 1 point to Fremantle. So that means, realistically, only the losses in the last 2 weeks against the Bulldogs and Port Adelaide are the major red flags. You expect teams, when they lose by less than a goal, those are games that can go either way with a missed shot on goal, those kind of things. You don't need to get too carried away with those ones, but the last 2 are really concerning. However, I do think they're going to bounce back. Numbers wise, Sydney is still far better than Collingwood. And like Collingwood, they've won the last two. They scraped over the line last week against Carlton, who are another team that are a bit shaky at the moment and a team that struggled defensively. And it was Scott Pendlebury's 400th game. So they had plenty of motivation to win that game. So they got the win there, and they also beat Richmond the week prior. So Collingwood's not really setting the world on fire. Prior to that, they lost 4 straight games as well. They do need to win to give themselves a chance of making finals. But even if they were to win this game, I still don't think they're probably going to make the top 8 now, based on their final 2 games of the season. So looking at potentially betting in this game, Sydney do have a good record. They've won 4 of the past 5 versus Collingwood, won the game in round 1 this season at the MCG, 102-69. They were 10.5-point underdogs for that game. So it's switched around. Even, they're coming off these bad performances, yet how much these odds have switched around from the Swans being a $2.62 underdog in round 1 to a $1.44 favorite. And that's a lot more than just home field advantage swing. I like the Swans to win this game. How I'm also considering approaching it is with the player props as well, as Collingwood this season can see the second most disposals to opposition players and also the second most uncontested possession. So for Sydney to get their runs going, this is a really good spot for them to do that against a side and give up a high number of uncontested possessions. So like the Swans to win, and there's going to be a few key players in the Swans lineup that I'm going to target with their player props. From a total points perspective, the line is at 179.5. I, statistically wise, in the bet finders have this set at 179. So I feel like this number is pretty much spot on. So no real lean statistically. From a numbers perspective, interestingly, between these two sides, 7 of the past 9 between them have gone under the total. The 2 games during that time that did go over have been in the last 3 meetings. One of those at the SCG. Last time they met at the SCG, the total was 162.5, so significantly higher. But this season, we've seen a lot of games going over, so the bookies push those numbers up to account for that. And I should mention right here off the top, so you guys know what we're talking about here with the statistics. I'm using the AFL bet finders to analyze the games. This is a tool that I created all the way back in 2014, evolved it slightly since then, but it helps me break down the statistics between the two sides and also how that stacks up against the entire league. So for example, when we're looking at the Swans Collingwood game, looking at their attack ratings, these are their overall season averages, where that stacks up in the league. Same for Collingwood, and then we can compare them against each other. And we'll see the Swans ranked second, fourth in shots on goal compared to Collingwood ranked 8th in that category, and so on and so forth. You can look at it defensively, see how they compare against each other defensively at the stoppages, and then for possessions, looking at opposition possessions, opponent disposals. That's where, as I just mentioned before, Collingwood can see the second most disposals to the opposition and second most uncontested possessions to the opposition. Also look at their efficiency, opponent efficiency, like when they go inside 50, how many times they converting that into scoring shots and goals. Same for their opponents, so we know how they perform defensively in these categories as well, and then how their scoring stacks up by quarter. So we can see, looking at this game, Collingwood have been the better first quarter side of the two teams, and interestingly, the Swans concede the second most points in first quarters overall on the season, which is a little bit of a crazy stat for a side that sits on top of the ladder. And that's one I just noticed just then as we're looking at this. And that's why it's so important to look through these. And with the bet finders, you can look at them at any time. I'll put the link in the description so you can use them for your research process for the rest of the season. And then we can see Sydney are the better side in second, third, and fourth quarters compared to Collingwood, but they're also, number 1, number 2 side for majority of those this year. So those are the bet finders comparison tool, and there's a stack of other tools, but this is one of the main ones that I'm looking at and using as I'm going through and speaking about these games. Because for myself personally, I don't bet based on my own opinion of these sides. Everything's based off how teams are performing currently, how they performed overall in the season, how they performed against the opposition. So using statistics, data, trends, all the information I can to lead me to the decisions I want to make, not just, guessing on what I think might happen. On to the Saturday games. First one, Brisbane versus GWS. Good game here, both sides in the top four. Brisbane $1.31, minus 21.5 at home here against the Giants. They haven't met at the Gabba since 2022, round 11. Brisbane were 32.5-point favorites for that game. Final score was 110-96. Both the games in the past 5 years at the Gabba did go over the total points line, and 5 of the past 6 between these two sides have gone over the total. For this matchup, the total is set at 178.5. I would be leaning towards the over in this game. I think we could see a high-scoring game in good conditions on Saturday afternoon. Brisbane have really hit form. They lost to Hawthorn back in round 11, went into the bye. Since then, they've now won 9 consecutive games. Quite a number of those were against fairly poor sides. It's about half and half, but they have had some good wins against the Swans and also Port Adelaide during that time. Quite a number of high scores as well. They're coming off a 124-point performance last week against St Kilda, who are one of the better defensive sides in the league. GWS coming off a very close win. They just got over the line against Hawthorn last week by 2 points. They've now won 5 in a row. So both sides in really good form. Brisbane have covered 4 of the past 6 versus GWS and won 5 of the past 6. Definitely lean towards Brisbane to be winning this game, but also do think it's going to be high scoring. Not super keen on the lines at the line, like that minus 21.5. I do think that number is fairly accurate. I wouldn't really like to see it any higher than that, but also don't want to take the Giants plus 21.5 at that number. How I'm looking at playing it though is taking the lines to win the game because I think they'll win at home, and also purely based on the fact that they are the better attack and better defensive side. They're ranked number 3 and number 2 respectively in those categories. Giants were right up there earlier in the season. Now they've fallen to 7th and 8th in those categories. So Brisbane should be able to get the job done, especially at home. And then, as I said, I think it's going to be high scoring. So I'm looking at taking the lines and also buying this total down slightly to get a little bit of a better number, which should see it go over the total. Following game, we have North Melbourne taking on West Coast. Interesting game this, both sides coming off wins, which with the way they sit in the ladder is not something you would expect. However, North Melbourne got over the top of Richmond last week by 13 points. And then West Coast broke a long run of ours, beating the Gold Coast Suns. Interestingly, both these sides have beaten Gold Coast in the past 5 weeks. So Gold Coast clearly not doing themselves many favors in their quest to try to make finals. How I'm looking at this game, North Melbourne $1.60, they're 9.5-point favorites. We pretty much have the bottom 3 attack and bottom 3 defense going up against each other here. However, I think playing down in Tasmania, North Melbourne can win this game. North Melbourne have been, a better side in the second half of the season than they were in the first half of the season. So there's definitely major signs of improvement there with them. And West Coast are a side who have played a lot better at home than they have on the road. The last 2 games on the road, they've lost by over 60 points in both of them, and they're coming off back-to-back home games against Gold Coast and Fremantle. Now have to go on the road down to Tasmania. Be leaning towards North Melbourne to win outright, and also we'll look into some props there on North Melbourne. I definitely like to target props against sides who give up high numbers of disposals, which West Coast are one of those sides, ranked 14th in opponent disposals. So there's always those key players we can target who will be able to step up against those kind of opposition. Also, this matchup, North Melbourne have won 4 of the past 5 and covered 2 of the past 3. They met in round 13. North Melbourne were able to get the win over West Coast in Perth. So they're better suited playing in Tasmania compared to, if they're playing in Perth. As I said, West Coast have been better at home. Also, between this matchup, the past 6 head-to-head have been decided by 15 or less. That's also part of the reason I'm also leaning towards the $1.60 as opposed to the minus 9.5. And the past 6 head-to-head have gone under. We have a total at 175.5, which I do think is high. This number is probably about 5 to even 6, 7 points higher than I'd really expect. I was really thinking a number in the 160s to higher 160s for this game. So I would be looking closely at the under here as both these sides do struggle to score. They can leak points. However, if teams can't capitalize on that, then it doesn't really even set it up well to be high scoring. And when you're getting a total at this kind of range, 175, pushing 180, you only really need one bad quarter where there's a 15-minute period where there's only one goal, and that can dramatically affect it. Pushes the number from needing, 45 points a quarter to suddenly needing 55, 60 points a quarter in order to go over the total, which can become very, very difficult. So for that game, like North and leaning towards under 175.5. Fremantle take on Geelong. Good game this. Fremantle won't be happy dropping that game last week against Essendon by 1 point. They get back home here, face Geelong, who are a side they have a good record against. They've won and covered the past 3 versus Geelong, and only one of those was at home in round 10 last season. The other 2 wins were both on the road, and they paid $10.50 last time in round 20 last season, $4 in the other matchup. So interestingly, they're $1.47. So huge turnaround in the odds from their last meeting in this round last season. But Fremantle at home this time around, I do think they are a touch short, but I think they're going to win the game. Geelong in good form. They won 5 of their past 6, dropped the game against the Bulldogs, but they are playing very, very well. At home, like Freo to get the win. Defensively is where the real big difference between these two sides are. Fremantle are the number 1 defense this season, only conceding 74 points on average compared to the Cats, ranked 12th defensively overall this season. Important game, but Fremantle to win. I don't really like the minus 13.5. I'd either take Freo to win and pair it up with something else, or look at Fremantle 1-39 as the other option in this game, as I don't see them winning by a big margin. Could also look at either side 1-24. That's probably my only other option, just giving a little bit of leeway there for the Dockers if they do lose the game. I can't see them losing by more than 2 goals, 3 goals at absolute most, and so that could be the other option. And I also, based on their previous meetings, Geelong lost by 7 points. They lost by 29 points in that matchup, and then 3 points in their previous back in round 7, 2022. So they haven't, been absolutely blown out by Fremantle by any means. On to Essendon versus Gold Coast. The Bombers, $1.51, minus 12.5. Essendon currently sit 9th on the ladder, so they have plenty to play for to try and win a spot into the top 8. Gold Coast season's over after their loss to West Coast last week. It's also a difficult situation for the Suns as they're coming on back-to-back travel weeks. They went to Perth last week, now travel to Melbourne for this game. So hardly an ideal situation. Essendon do have a good record. They've covered 4 of the past 5, won 7 of the past 9, and there's 1 draw in there. So Gold Coast have only won 1 of the past 9, which was their last matchup in round 12 this season at home. But Essendon have won all 6 meetings between these two sides in Melbourne. Essendon, realistically, they've been such a inconsistent team overall this season. Like games where you think, everything looks set up that they're going to win this game, they play poorly, and then games where they're not really given that big of a chance, then they're the games where they turn up. This is a game they pretty much must win. So whether the key is, can they put it together on game day? They've only won 1 of their past 4 games, which was last week by 1 point. So just trusting them to get the win is the only concern. But with so much motivation in their favor, the fact that Gold Coast can't win a game on the road, they're on an awkward travel schedule coming into this. Essendon should win, and should win fairly comfortable. I think they win this game by 3 to 4 goals, so should cover the minus 12.5. Right now, I haven't fully decided how I want to play this game, whether taking the Bombers to win and just win the game outright, or the minus 12.5. But I'll be looking at one of those options for this matchup, as at this stage in the season, I really like to target teams that have that motivation to play for, and especially when there's a few negatives for the opposition side. Melbourne versus Port Adelaide. Port come into this $1.42 minus 15.5, and they're in extremely good form right now. They've won 3 in a row, beating the Sydney Swans last week by 112 points. How they come through that game onto a road trip against Melbourne, who are a little bit of a tricky opposition, is going to be very, very interesting. Melbourne have a good record against them, winning and covering 4 of the past 5. But I think Port Adelaide can win this game. Playing at the MCG hasn't really been an issue for Port recently. They've won 3 of their past 4 at the venue, and they're just playing in a lot better form than Melbourne, who have now lost their past 3 games. However, they've played top 8 sides all during that period: Bulldogs, GWS, and Fremantle. But that's also the case once again here, and I think that Port Adelaide get the better of them. Melbourne's defense has really started to continue to taper off as the season has progressed. They've conceded 85 points or more in their past 3. So for this game, I am looking at Port's team total to go over. They're in extremely good attacking form. Overall this season, they've now moved up to the 6th best attacking side, and they lead the league in shots on goal per game. Melbourne, who we've known over the seasons, and there's that, kind of stereotype that everyone just expects Melbourne to be really good defensively. Their numbers have really continued to drop off, and they're now ranked 10th in opponent shots on goal. So if Port kick straight, they'll be able to put up a score here and go over their team total and get the number under 90 or even at 90. Then I'll be playing Port's team total to go over in this matchup, and I also like them to be winning this game. The only concern with playing that over is that 10 of the past 11 between these 2 sides have gone under. The last meeting went over. Port kicked 89 points. But I think with the current form they're in, they'll be able to put up a score against this Melbourne defense, as I said, who is starting to struggle. On to the Sunday games now. Carlton take on Hawthorn. Super important game for both sides, where they currently sit on the ladder. Carlton in 8th position now, after being pretty much in the top 3 all season until the past few weeks. They've now lost 4 of their past 5 games, and they're pretty much in the same boat as the Swans, in that the fact that during that past 5 weeks, they've only beaten North Melbourne during that time, and they only beat them by 19 points. So not a super impressive win. Hawthorn, this is obviously an important game. If they do win, puts them on 48 points, and they play Richmond and North Melbourne in the final 2 weeks of the season. So obviously, if they didn't drop that game last week against GWS, they'd be in a really good position, but obviously still can force their way in with a win here. So really, really important game. These sides only meet once per season. The bookies currently can't split them. They have Carlton slight favorites, but basically a pick 'em at most places. Carlton have covered 2 of the past 3 and won the past 3 versus Hawthorn. They last met in round 16 last season. Carlton won minus 19.5, $1.35, and won 112-52. Interestingly, between these sides, 4 of the past 6 head-to-head have gone over. Carlton's defense is obviously the major concern. Like, when you look at approaching betting this game, you look at the numbers. Carlton, the number 1 attacking side, still averaging 97 points a game. However, they're still ranked 14th defensively. Hawthorn, the better defensive side, but ranked 12th in attack. Hawks, though, are probably, you'd say, in better overall form coming into this. They've lost the last game against GWS by 2 points. But prior to that, did win 8 of their 9 games, and the only loss against Geelong. Obviously, a young team, how they step up against Carlton in this kind of situation with a big crowd is going to be very interesting. 2 ways I'm looking at playing this game. I do think Hawthorn are a major chance, just purely based on Carlton's defense. We've seen teams that are, have fairly low defensive numbers over the past 2 months. Hawthorn are able to really capitalize on that. And last week against GWS, looking at them from a defensive perspective, was the first time they conceded over 80 points. And it was only 84 in the end, with GWS putting on that late run. But that was the first time they've conceded over 80 points since round 8 against the Western Bulldogs. So defensively, they potentially are going to be capable of at least slowing down Carlton. So leaning towards Hawthorn to be winning this game. And then from a total perspective, I am definitely interested in the over 172.5. Prefer a slightly lower number though. I feel like this number is, a couple of points too high, but I could see this being a high scoring game. So in between those two plays, but probably prefer taking the Hawks to win this matchup. Then Richmond versus St Kilda. This is a game I'm really, really not keen on at all. St Kilda 4-goal favorites, minus 23.5. Lowest total of the round at 163.5. Richmond coming to this game on a 7-game losing streak. St Kilda coming in off a huge loss last week against the Brisbane Lions. Not a game I really want to get involved in from a betting perspective, from a sides or totals. Both these sides are playing really, really poorly. St Kilda should win just purely based on their defense, which is a lot better than the Richmond defense, which is second worst in the league. However, Richmond kind of have had a little bit of a habit of hanging around in games. Looking also at this game, the player props from a perspective of taking St Kilda, as Richmond do concede the most disposals to opposition players. So St Kilda's player props probably the best angle for successful bets in this game. Interestingly, as I mentioned, this is the lowest total line of the round at 163.5. 9 of the past 13 between these two sides have gone over. So we have, a big over trend for this matchup. However, the way these sides are playing, it's very, very difficult to take them with much confidence. Last week, St Kilda only put up 39 points against the Brisbane Lions. However, against, less opposition, the week prior, they put up 180 against Essendon, and against lesser opposition, again, they put up 113 at home against West Coast. Prior to that, against Adelaide, only scored 39. But like St Kilda, just a very inconsistent team, hard to trust, as is the case with both, and that's why player props, disposal markets is probably the best way of approaching this game and winning your bets. Then final game of the round, Adelaide take on the Western Bulldogs. Western Bulldogs and other these sides, kind of similar to Port Adelaide, who've really hit a form patch. The Bulldogs have been four higher quality sides over the past 4 weeks: Carlton, Geelong, Sydney, and Melbourne. And done them all, beaten them all very, very convincingly. They're 15.5 point favorites here. 167.5 is the total. Bulldogs have a good record in this matchup, winning and covering 4 of the past 5 versus the Crows. They won the last matchup in round 10 last season, 85 points to 40. They haven't met at the Adelaide Oval for a while, though. You have to go back to 2018 for their last meeting at the Adelaide Oval. Western Bulldogs have also lost their past 4 at the venue. However, 3 of those against Port Adelaide, 1 against Geelong. This game, though, I think Bulldogs win and win comfortably. Adelaide are a team who, are really struggling at the moment. They can push sides. They got a win a few weeks ago against Essendon in the dying stages, but then comprehensively beaten by Hawthorn. And Geelong kind of, took their time in putting them away and weren't super convincing against them, but were able to get the win. I think the Bulldogs cover the 15.5. This matchup has seen some big margins previously. 6 of the past 7 have been decided by 30 plus. So like the Bulldogs cover the minus 15.5 to close out the round. Obviously an important game for them there. Kind of in that same boat with Carlton sitting on 48 points. However, they do have a significantly better percentage, and important that they get over the line here, and they have motivation compared to the Crows sitting down there in 15th on the ladder. So quickly recap what I'm thinking for the games this weekend. Like the Swans to win, and we'll be also looking into their props for this matchup. Brisbane should be able to win against GWS, and also interested in the overs in that game. North Melbourne versus West Coast, like North Melbourne to be winning that match. Fremantle versus Geelong, Fremantle and potentially Fremantle 1-39. Essendon versus Gold Coast, like the Bombers to be winning this game. Melbourne versus Port Adelaide, like Port Adelaide to be winning and covering the minus 15.5. Interested in Port's team total in this game to be going over against the Demons. Carlton versus Hawthorn, like Hawthorn to win, and somewhat interested in the over in that game. Richmond versus Kilda, targeting the Saints player props. And Adelaide versus the Western Bulldogs, like the Bulldogs to win and cover the 15.5. That's how I'm considering playing. Lineups come out on Thursday night, which can obviously slightly change my opinion on these games. So if you want the final bets and everything, I'm exactly betting for this round and for the rest of the season. You can get that with the bet finders. I'll put the link in the description. That's where you also get all the tools, betting guides, everything I'm using to go through and analyze the games. Lots of people are now using them since I made them available this season, and it's dramatically changing how they're approaching researching games, which is one of the most important things you can do if you actually want to make money betting. If you're just going to randomly pick games, it's going to be very hard to win consistently. And if you want to make money every year betting on the AFL, what I share with the bet finders is one of the integral components to actually do that. So definitely check it out, use it for the rest of the season, see how the difference it makes to your results. Then you're fully prepared to go into next season. You've got the skills under your belt from what you've done at the end of this year with your analysis. You built that up, and then you're able to prepare for next year. You have all of this ready to go through, analyze games right throughout next year, and you'll literally make 2025 your best year betting on the AFL by doing this. And the bet finders not only help you, pick which side you want to bet or how much a team's going to win by, or whether it's going to be high or low scoring, but you can also use them for player props, who's going to kick goals, how many fantasy points players are going to get. All the tools are included, and you can also get them for all the other major sports that are coming up. Obviously, a lot of the soccer leagues are coming up starting in the next week or so, so you can also use the soccer bet finders as well for those. Rest of the season, NRL, and then we have baseball going on right now, and American football starting within the next month. So tons of sport coming up, and if you want to make money betting on it, these are the tools that you can use to be able to do that. So definitely check it out. Appreciate you guys watching and supporting the channel. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any videos for the rest of the season. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great weekend.